We're bringing you a director of IT support for Taylor Morrison, a home builder in southern and western states in the US, a frequent consultant, speaker, and author. You might have seen him at Support World Live or one of the industry conferences, co-host of Keep the Learning On podcast, KTLO, and has a history of serving with the state of Oregon as both the CIO and other roles. Welcome to Ticket Volume, news and information for improving IT experiences, powered by InvGate. Welcome to Ticket Volume, Greg Sanker.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. It's great to see you. You always have such a positive energy, and I love your tweet stream. If you don't follow Greg Sanker on Twitter, definitely do it. He'll come out of the blue with some really good nuggets of wisdom and is always sort of like challenging people to think differently. So really appreciate the content you put out there, Greg.
Thank you.
So let's talk quickly about the intersection of technology and culture, because I think this is something that you're passionate about, something that we've talked about. What do you think is happening in organizations when it comes to that pairing?
It is across the board. Every organization is unique and every organization is at a different place of their transformation. But generally speaking, here's what's happening. We've been doing this tech refresh thing for decades, right? We bring in new technology, hey, off we go. And we've been increasingly aware that there's a cultural element associated with the technology that we use. I want to use a real world example, and I'd rather not say who it was, but I was working with an organization that we were bringing in a collaboration suite. And if I'm careful, I won't say Microsoft Office. So I'll just say a collaboration suite. And it was a pretty old school culture. And so we're rolling it out and we're realizing that we're just not getting the gains that we want. In fact, we're getting pushback. We don't like this. And we're like, how could you possibly not like modern tools that allow instantaneous collaboration across the world? And so as we dug into it, what we found was that people were trying to use modern tools the same way that they've used old-fashioned tools. In other words, a collaboration tool like that is like, every document is available for everybody to see, and you can see everybody that's working on it. And you might have a meeting where rather than saying, hey, did everybody get a copy of what I sent out? It's like, no, let's just open it up and look at it right now. What we quickly learned was this wasn't an implementation issue. This was a culture issue. Yeah. And so we started really teaching this concept that we called working out loud. In other words, I don't hide and develop my document and get it honed, and then at midnight, of the due date, I send it out there. Everybody take a look at what you saw. Very old school, very batch mode, very, siloed or partitioned off. And now it's like, hey, I've started this document. I'm going to be building it out. And so I get down to here. It's like, what's the scope? And if somebody instantly jumps in and goes, hey, I really question that this is the right scope. Remember, we talked about X, Y, and Z. It's like, oh, yeah, right. Let's get on that. Right. And so whether we do it real time, whether we get on a collaboration call, or we're just trading tidbits as we go through our day, it's a very different way. So here's the thing. It's like the technology by itself wasn't really doing anything for us. And so why do we deploy collaboration suites? We think we're increasing productivity and we think we're increasing collaboration, but by itself, it doesn't. And so that's where I get to my kind of radical idea. And you heard it here first, right? So hey, here we go. We have DevOps. Remember that? It's like the radical idea that those nasty devs that throw things over the walls should probably work with those, belligerently structured operations folks that say, don't change anything ever, right? Hand it to me, right? And the idea that we should be working horizontally throughout the organization for maximum delivery of value. And it's a radical idea. So here's my radical idea that's very, very similar. It's not about IT, the CIO, working with HR, which primarily has the mantle on culture. It's something other than that. It's not, CIOs should go to coffee with the CHRO and make sure that we're working together. Here's an interesting thing. From CIO.com, here's the top issues that CIOs, according to CIO.com, these are the top things that CIOs are concerned about. Talent acquisition, skills gap, hybrid work, in office, out of office, cybersecurity, tech supply chain, employee burnout, and managing organizational change, right? So of those, 5 of those 7 are not technology at all.
No.
It's culture, it's people, right? So here's the top, from a Forbes article, here's the top issues that chief human resources officers are interested in. DEI, remote work, change management, skills gap, leadership development, talent acquisition, employee experience. And again, there was a difference in skills gap. One of them was developing them and leadership training. Man, there's a tremendous overlap. We're seeing the same challenges, but we're treating them as two different silos for the most part. It's a whole team sport. It's just a different way of going about it. So, as I like to say, you can't separate the culture from the technology, and you can't separate the technology from the culture. So you have IT people going, hey, it's the people. Like, does anybody believe that they have a personality that's suitable for dealing with culture or skills or a background or, I don't mean to be insulting, but that's not the focus.
Right.
Likewise, HR historically has a poor relationship with technology, but has a mastery of people and culture and learning and development and how people work together. We need both. And we can't do it as a collaboration. It has to be something new. That's what I'm thinking.
Oh, man, props to you, Greg. You are a good guest because you brought printed materials. I heard you flipping pages there. You brought references. But I love that example, that pointed example that you made right at the beginning there, where you said it's not necessarily about the features or the functions of the tool. It's really about how vulnerable can I be in front of my peers? Can I fail? Can I make typos in front of my peers real time to be watched across the globe?
That's a really important thing. It's like, why do people like to create our documents in private? Because we make typos. We want to sit back and read it and go, oh, yeah, so I kind of didn't make my point real. But when you're doing it live, like if you and I were developing this that we're talking about right now, I mean, it's like, oops, that didn't go where I wanted it to, right? So let's edit that, right? So it's like there's that vulnerability and safe to fail, or, the idea that it's like not everything is fully thought out before we talk about it. Mm-hmm. And the idea that it's like, I don't need to convince you that I'm the smartest guy in the room. First of all, I'm not, and everybody knows it except perhaps me. But secondarily, it's like everybody brings something to the table. Mm-hmm. So I have some people with whom I'm very comfortable. I'm typing, that person is going, hey, that's not it. No, use a different word. Oh, you misspelled that, right? And it's like, rather than feeling like back off, it's like, thank you. Because we're getting this thing done.
Exactly. We're stronger together. We really are. And the same thing, I really like your point about IT and HR. They really have different focuses. And you're right. It's not like we're blaming IT for not being organizational change management consultants. We just haven't been doing that as part of our daily work. And so if you don't have the luxury of taking the time to go learn, like going to school or switching industries and like learning a new practice and then coming back and cross-pollinating the industries, then you need to partner with people so that you're getting the right value and you're getting the right outcomes that you're achieving. And you said something at the end there that I want to ask you just a little bit more about. You think it's a new role. Pairing those teams together isn't enough, that you think it's something new or different.
So I'm trying to spur conversation in the industry because I think it is something new. Let's break some glass and see what happens here. I've been doing this for a very long time. I have employees that were born after I started doing what I do, right? Yeah. So it's like and we've been so focused on we've got to work across the silos and we've got to work together and we need to, create documentation so other people can understand our piece of this. Mm-hmm. We've put a lot of effort into that. And then we as IT people say, but keep those HR people out of this because you know what they're going to do to all of this. And the interesting thing is, and I have friends in HR, so no offense intended, but they're over in their meetings going, and you know how those IT people are. They're just going to make it rigid and structured, and right? So it's like somehow we've got to take our own medicine and say we've got to change our thinking, our very thinking about what those borders are.
Yeah, and what those different teams are. You're totally right. And I've seen it on a couple projects. One I'm actually talking about it at Service Management World in November. It is an ESM. Like if you've done an ESM, an enterprise service management project, you start to realize the value of bringing the teams. And certainly we saw it in change management and release management. If you involved security early, it definitely saved your rear end a lot. You can get a lot more done quickly instead of just waiting and apologizing.
Fair warning. Don't get me started on change management.
It's true. A lot of your tweet stream has a lot of that in there. But I think you've nailed it. You're like What we did in those projects is we tried to employ design thinking. We tried to employ the thought that you would bring all those stakeholders to the table to get what's valuable out of them, fail together and bring value together, and just develop that vulnerability. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
So as I was thinking about, like, Greg, how do you explain this thing that you're talking about? And there's a number of elements that I think play into it, and it'll sound like the usual suspect, but I'm encouraging folks, myself included, to think about how these kind of ferment together. So design thinking is definitely it. And by the way, I think we need to reteach design thinking. We need to restart the concept of design thinking, because it's not as rigid and complex as we might have implied. And it's not as new as some people would have us believe. I mean, IBM was teaching design thinking decades ago, right? Literally as a concept. The other one is, and it's related, is systems thinking. And the reason, and I'm not going to get sidetracked on this, but part of the concept of a system is a system of systems. So there's components and how they interact with each other. And so if you think about it, you don't actually change the system, you change how the parts interact with each other to produce, or as Dave Snowden, the godfather of complexity framework, says, circumstances that are more favorable to produce the outcomes that you want. In other words, you can't rigidly change it. And so much of the work that we've done in service management and process engineering has been under the belief that it's a simple system and we can engineer it and get exactly what we want. But it's not.
No.
And that's where, if you think about the HR-IT connection and others throughout the organization, is we have to be mindful of those interactions between those parts of the system that we haven't traditionally thought about. They impact the outcome of the system overall. So when you take a look at something like employee experience, or even customer experience, external customer experience, you can't just say, oh, well, support needs to answer the phone more quickly. It's not that simple. It's vastly more complex than that. So the other one I mentioned was complexity or sense making. I think leadership and governance, we tend to think it's like, well, that's for them up there, and it's really not applied to us. And so we kind of try to mask it out. But likewise, we have organizations that are really ham-handed in both leadership and governance. So that governance, and as soon as I say governance, most of your listeners are like groaning, right? It's like, oh, governance, you want it? Yeah, exactly, right? So it's like governance is just simply how we guide the organization or how decisions are made. So it's perfectly acceptable to say our governance model is we push decision-making down to the app teams or the product teams. That's a governance model, and we'd leave you alone. It's like, so when I talk about governance, I'm not saying you should have rigid command and control, tops down, every decision, blah, blah, blah. I'm just simply saying how we do it needs to be clear, and it needs to be effective within the organization. And leadership, I think, is a perennial favorite. And the other is just simply, and I think you've mentioned this multiple times before, but we talk about outcomes over outputs, but I think of it a little more nuanced than that. It's, what is the business outcome? Not just even the outcome from IT. In 2017, when my book on change management was published, and I'm not selling my book, but it was 2017. That's been a while, right? And point number 4 is ensure that changes achieve the desired business outcome.
Bingo.
And that is decidedly not a typical change management outcome. But it's like, I don't care if you installed the components correctly. Is it producing the business result that we need? If not, you're not complete, or you haven't been successful in doing that. And that's kind of the, we talk about, process, the process must be followed, or the activities must be done. And we put so much focus on that, which that ties back to that whole manufacturing mindset that if we define our processes and we rigidly follow them, Six Sigma and all that sort of stuff. And I'm a Six Sigma fan, but it kind of took a bad turn. If you follow it rigidly, or as I like to say, if a little bit of process is good, then a lot of process is a lot better, right? And it's not. I mean, just read about the Toyota production system. It's like, please do, because it's a fascinating read.
Yeah.
Gene Kim talked about this at DevOps Enterprise Summit. You can see it was in San Francisco. I forget what year it was, and I don't have the link for you. Sorry, but Google it. But Gene Kim was talking about when he toured the Toyota factory, and he said there's like a chain down the middle, like a rope down the middle. And I listened to it a number of times because I couldn't believe what he had just said. But anytime anybody on the production line sees anything that looks wrong, they are to pull the rope, the whole line stops, and everybody comes scrambling down. What's going on? What do we do? And they fix the problem, and then they restart the process. And he said, do you know how many times a day that gets pulled? And I'm here at home watching on YouTube and going, I don't know, like once or twice maybe, and that seems a lot. And apparently, and I'm not going to quote the number he gave because I even am suspicious of this, but it's hundreds of times. Mm-hmm. Not just one or two are a rare instance. It happens all the time. And the difference there is that everybody is involved with making sure that the outcome is as desired. Everybody. They know what the mission is and they're aligned with it. It's fascinating stuff.
It's a perfect example of a human process. Mm-hmm. I worked at a canning company for a summer back in high school, and I'll tell you, this is exactly how it works. You know, the cans stop coming down the line. People start asking questions. You start walking up the line. Is the boiler working? Are they actually getting canned properly? Is the temperature of the canning system right? Like all the things that you have to check get checked. And it really comes down to like what level of maturity are you at? What level of process automation are you at? What level of trust you have within your individual teams? And then you sort of start to figure out, okay, this is what's working for us. This isn't what's working for us. You also pointed out, I would really love to see on a change record how much revenue we are getting on top of, like, right? And then 6 months later, you can look at that change record and, oh, look, now it's $10,000 or now it's $20,000 or whatever it is. And like to try to really understand the impact of that change. It'd be really interesting to see that at retrospective.
I made a attempt to normalize that exact same thing. Because if we say, oh, this is going to increase productivity by 10%.
Does it?
Or 5 or 2 or whatever. Well, let's just hold ourselves accountable. Because we all, once we implement the change, we all go out and celebrate in, in whatever fashion we do. And then we wake up the next morning. Yeah, we pat ourselves on the back. That's great. But you said you were going to do something. Did you do it? Mm-hmm. And that's not adversarial. That's just simply accountability. Mm-hmm. And when we know that we're going to be held accountable, then we don't make these grandiose. I mean, I've seen. I shouldn't share, that, user story scoring is like, oh, this has massive business value. This is massive. How much do I need to say? 10, 20, 30, 40. Oh, now I'm scored up where I want to be. So that's how much it is, right? And it's like, don't game the system if you're going to be held accountable to that. Can you produce those kind of results? And will you? I love that.
That's good advice. Don't game the system if you're going to be held accountable. Yeah, you're gaming yourself, buddy.
you can quote me on that.
I love that one. Okay, so you've taught ITIL before, and you sort of stopped. I want to say that you fell out of love with ITIL for a little bit. You sort of had this rocky relationship for a while, and then ITIL 4 came out, and you started speaking about it more. So why is that? What are you seeing in that framework that's got your eye, that's got your attention?
So that's a fascinating observation. Yes, I can't say that I soured on it, but what I did see was so much of the V2, V3 in 2011. And I love ITIL in as far as what it is. So I have no dislike for the framework. But what I saw in organizations is this radical focus on processes. Mm-hmm. And it was never intended that way. I know most of the ITIL authors personally, and I speak to them frequently, and I say, was this the plan? No, it was never the plan, right? But that's how it's happening in organizations. And that's that system thinking thing that I was talking about, is if part of our system is this framework that seems to be producing this not great result, we need to change something. Yeah. So remember when Kaimar Karu was the director of ITIL? Yep. Now I forget what his exact term was, but he sends his tweet out, hey, I'm going to be in Seattle, on such and such a date if anybody wants to meet up. And it's like, I'm 4 hours drive south of Seattle. And I said, I'm going to drive to Seattle and I'm going to meet up with Kaimar. So I got up in the middle of the night and I drove to Seattle and I met with Kaimar for probably 3 or 4 hours because we had a great conversation, and Kaimar is an outstanding, brilliant individual. And I said, because I had nothing to lose, here's everything that's wrong with ITIL. And I don't mean it as a criticism. I mean it as I work out in organizations where this hasn't worked real well. And these are some of the reasons why. Now, I will say that a fair amount of what I shared with him was included. Has nothing to do with me. I am not the guy that told Axios that this is what you need to include, because it's a common thread.
Right.
But what I am saying is that there were materially missing pieces or misguided pieces. So the one I always have taught service management, whether it's formal ITIL or just ISO 20 derived service management, would be that you have to have a focus on what outcomes and what value are we delivering to the organization overall. And I've always said that these processes work together to deliver value. And so lo and behold, here comes the service value system, which, by the way, is part of the ISO 20 standard.
Yep.
It's in there, the
And
service
has been
value
for a
system.
while.
And has been for a very long time, right? So these aren't overly new. But the idea that everything starts with an opportunity or demand and ends with value that's delivered, and the concept of co-creation, which I get kind of tired of saying. It kind of feels like a dated term, but just the idea that IT's part isn't, some assembly required. We are working in tandem to deliver value down the value stream or the value chain, ultimately delivering value to our organization with the recognition that we're probably co-creating value with those consumers of our services and their consumers. So it's a much broader view of what it is that we're trying to achieve. That got me excited because I think we can teach that in organizations.
Yeah.
So that said, the first question that I get is, so we're looking at service management. Do we have process owners in ITIL 4? It's like, I don't know. Doesn't say. It's not in there, right? So do you? Because, we know that we still have processes, but the processes that are at a lower level. So change enablement is a practice area, as are incident requests, service desk, all these kind of things. They're practices, which mean they have processes, but but more of a comprehensive managing this capability within the organization.
Yes.
So do you have process owners, and how do we cross that bridge? And I don't know that we fully solved that problem. And every consultant and trainer that is listening to this says, well, we have, because we have to do this, right? So that's the point, is it is being solved out in the real world. But there isn't necessarily the guidance that says, here's how you do it. And I think that we still have room for that.
Yeah. There's tons of room for improvement when it comes to prescriptive approaches to ITIL.
Yes.
You can say it depends as many times as you want until you're blue in the face. But really that self-reflection, if it's externally influenced, great. If it's internally influenced, also great. But take that time to reflect and understand. Do we need process owners? Is it a capability owner? Is it a group of people? Because it's always been a responsibility and like a hat that you wear, but it's not always a dedicated person either.
Right.
But you need to have some sort of system, a process of processes, if you will, that like you can understand, hey, are we improving on this enough for our organization?
You know what I find really interesting, Matt, is that if you look at job postings that have service management, ITSM or ITIL in it, just go out and Google it. Depending on the industry, what you'll find is there are some organizations whose job postings really reflect very rigid, very structured, very process-centric, and they say, we need an incident management process owner, right? We're looking for an incident management process owner. And it's like, oh, that's really interesting because it helps me understand, as you put it, the maturity or the focus of your organization. What I'm not seeing is where we're looking at job titles that really talk about more comprehensive value delivery or service value assurance kind of roles that I would think are more of the outcome focused thing. So I'm not sure where that's going to go yet. One of the things that I think is happening is that leading organizations, which we used to call unicorn organizations, they're just doing it. They're not advertising that they're just doing it. They're being successful. I talked to a very prominent infrastructure manager, very senior level, for a tool that all of us use every day, right? So this is like the best of the best. And I asked about service management, and he almost implied, I don't really think about that much. And I just laughed because it's like, this has been my theory for years. It's like the people that are really achieving at the highest level aren't rigidly adhering to or zealously adhering to a specific thing. They're tied to the outcomes that their organization needs to and is held accountable to achieving, and they'll use tools as it serves their need, which is kind of the way we need to be.
Yes, it's the dream. That is the dream. That is
I
the
know.
vision, to have it fully automated, like back of mind. Your tools have it built in, your people have it built in, your procedures have it built in, and you can focus on product, outcomes, value.
Yes. Props to that.
Yes.
Let's do that. Let's do that thing. I love that.
That's great. I love it too. Greg, where can people connect? Where can people learn more?
You mentioned I'm active on Twitter. I am active on Twitter at GT Sanker. I'm on LinkedIn also, LinkedIn/GT Sanker. Or feel free to email me, greg.sanker@itsmtransition.com. That's my kind of service management derived web presence. Happy to connect with anybody. If you connect with me to sell me a product, I may or may not be as responsive, but I'm always happy to help people with issues or answer questions or tell you that I don't know, here's some other people that might be better to answer those questions. Service management has been a great community for years, and I feel it's an honor and a privilege to be contributing to that community.
Well put, Greg. Thanks for being on Ticket Volume.
Thank you.
And for our audience, thanks for hitting play. I'll see you around the way. I'm your host, Matt Barron. You can find me on Twitter @MattBarron or LinkedIn @MattBarron. Post a review, send feedback, subscribe to Ticket Volume, and thank you for listening to Ticket Volume, a podcast powered by InvGate.